Welcome back to another episode of the All Tens Podcast. I'm your co-host Josh West here, as always, with Clay Harris. And Clay, today we're going to talk through the VTO, otherwise known as the Vision Traction Organizer. And this is EOS's simplified version of a business plan in which we work with business owners and their leadership teams to answer 8 very critical questions. And the first one up today is, what are your core values? Clay, can you give our listeners a little bit more context about that?
About the core values?
Yeah.
Man, we're jumping right in here, Josh. Yeah, I like it. Look at you. Quick start. All right, let's go. Core values. First question on the VTO, and there's a reason they're the first question. They're the foundation. They are the very essential thing that you have to kind of answer, and you're not answering it like academically. It's actually more of a discovery process that we go through with leadership teams to figure out kind of as simply as possible who they are. Core values are who you are, what you want the culture of your company to produce. They're the bottom of the answer pyramid when we're filling out the VTO. Everything else flows from core values because they should ignite your soul when you read them. They are who you are. They are the embodiment of what you want your company to be producing. Not the products, not the widgets, but the feelings, the stuff that makes you feel all fuzzy, right? Am I right there? I think I'm right.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we talk about it being that defining set of characteristics, and it is the heartbeat and it's the soul of the organization. When you read those core values, it should ignite and move something inside of you. You know, when I'm working with teams about it, and we'll talk in a moment about some of the filters and the traps that we put them through, but certainly the exercise is, and you hinted at it earlier, it is about that discovery. Certainly we don't walk in there with sort of a canned list of, hey, here's some great values, let's just pick some. That's not how it is. The trick is that this already exists inside of your organization, and all we're doing is helping ask the right questions and help the team get through an exercise to really bubble them up to the surface.
If a
So
team
they
member
can then be shared.
If you're working with a client, Josh, and they say to you, "But Josh, we've already got core values."
It's happened before. Indeed.
And?
Well, in the very first case that I think about, it was very apparent to me that these values were for a subset of the organization, specifically for one department, if you will, of their workforce. And instead of, declaring, no, guys, that's not it, instead, I just reflected that to them and said, okay, so what do those things mean for people that were not in that group? And then it became apparent to them, oh, well, yeah, so those aren't the core values, because it's important that we understand that the core values apply to everyone across the organization. And, even further, we talk about, the 5 things that we use the core values for. We are hiring, firing, reviewing, rewarding, and recognizing individuals inside of the organization by these values. And certainly it's what we mean when we talk about having the right person inside of the organization. So it's not a set of values or even, behaviors that you're assigning to a certain subset of them. And so that immediately the light bulbs went off and they got it, and they understood that it was something greater that applied to everyone.
What is that because? Was that because like the person, the leader or the owner, whomever, like the company had grown? What was that a symptom of? What was the genesis of that?
I think that this is a services company in an essential trade. And so they have a lot of technicians out in the field. And so this is the values that they wanted those technicians out in the field, and also when they're interacting with the public and customers, to act like. But yet some of those things really just didn't apply to some of the people back at the office. And so it was something that had organically grown out of sort of a set of defining behaviors that particular department needed, but that we those weren't core values as we define.
Interesting. Cool. I had a experience with a client who had already defined their core values, and they were great. They were like well written, they were thoughtful, they were um they checked a lot of boxes. If you read them on their website, you'd be like, man, they got it together, right? And we got in the room with the leadership team, and a couple of team members were really kind of connected to those core values the way they had been captured, and some other team members kind of thought that they failed our filter test. And so when we're going through core values exercise and we're applying some filters, I think these come from Patrick Lencioni, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what are the filters again? Remind me what they are, Josh.
So permission to play.
What does that mean?
So specifically, that's where the first one that always comes to mind for me is honest. And I think like, well, are there people out there that are trying to hire people that are dishonest? So that's more of just being a good person within inside of any organization. Everybody wants people that are honest, and core values are about the unique values of your organization. And so honesty would fail on that filter of permission to play because it's like you're not really saying anything there.
Okay. So first one was permission to play. What's the second one?
Aspirational. So just be honest with yourself. You'd like to have that, but you don't.
Okay.
And so, certainly, that's where, oh, we'd love to be that, but that's not who we are. Well, then that's not a core value of who you are. And I think that really speaks to also when we talk about this as a discovery exercise, not a defining exercise, right? Like, again, as implementers, we don't show up with a list and start to say, pick off of it, right? And that's sort of an aspirational thing, but rather the exercise is more around, okay, who are you? Like already.
And what's the third?
It's accidental. And so it's not intentional. So, if it just so happens that, there's one example that we read about where there was a retail company, and a lot of the people who worked there were kind of young and hip, and they all kind of dressed in black. And so, great. All right, fine. Everybody does that. Everybody kind of dresses the same, but that's not who you are as a core value. And that has just sort of happened organically, and as you said, kind of accidentally, without it being intentionally driven, particularly from the leadership team. And so, to recap that, we put those values through the filters of permission to play, just being a good person, aspirational. Let's make sure you really have it inside of your organization, and accidental. This is something that has intentionally grown within the organization and not something by happenstance.
So for my team, when we went through that exercise of going through the filters, they had a couple that were permission to play type things and a couple that were aspirational, like to sound good but aren't true for us. And what that actually ended up meaning is that those core values, they looked good on paper, but they were meaningless in practice, right? And I think the thing that we're trying to do when we define core values, one is discover what they are for you, your unique core values are for your unique organization, to make them meaningful so that you can reward, recognize, hire, fire, whatever the other one is. There's 5. You said them earlier. You could figure out who's the one who studies and who doesn't, obviously. But so you can bring them to life in the organization, not just have them live on a piece of paper or on the website. Core values should help you manage the business, not help you define the business that you want to be one day. The gap between what you say you do and what you really are is the place where kind of distrust gets bred, right? And so if you go around to your team members all the time saying like, here are our core values, and they're aspirational, they're going to think that everything else you say is aspirational too and not based in reality, and it's not going to help. So what do we want to do to wrap this one up on core values, Joshy?
So, this is usually the part of the program, Clay, where we share a few nuggets. I've got a few for our listeners. We referenced it. I think the most common pitfall I see here is a lot of teams falling into those permission to play values. So if it's something that you would just expect in any organization out of any employee, then that's probably a good sign that that's just permission to play and that's not a core value. The second one, I think, really, really pays a lot of dividends. And that is once you have those values defined, really have 1 to 2 kind of clarifying sentences about specifically what that means inside of your organization. Because we'll use these later, and we talked about hiring, firing, reviewing, rewarding, and recognizing based on that. So whenever a leader is evaluating someone for that fit and determining if they are the right person for the organization, if you're just looking at 1 or 2 words and saying, oh, well, do they have that value? Well, you're around them all the time, right? You've probably met their family. And so it's easy to just say, yeah, they've got that. But if we're reading those clarifying statements of what it really means inside of this organization, that's a more granular evaluation and gives us commensurately a more granular sort of understanding about whether that person truly does have that value. And I always kind of give the example of, on the one hand, I could be working with an organization where, it's a tough job. There's a lot of manual labor involved. And, saying that you are tough inside of that organization means something completely different if we're talking about what it means to be tough at a law firm, right? And so both of those organizations could have that as a core value, but then it's those clarifying statements about what it means inside of that organization that really finally rounds it out and really gives it a lot of meaning. How about you, Clay?
I had no notes, Joshy. Those were great little nuggets for our listeners, and I'm going to wrap us up because this has been a lot of talking about core values. And even though it was like a longer podcast for us, the reason is because this is the question to answer. Like, if you're going to start anywhere, this core values discovery for your organization would really kind of sets the stage for the rest of the work that you would do in implementing EOS. So don't go quickly through it. Cool? Well, my name's Clay. His name is Josh. We're the All Tens Podcast. We're so happy that you listened. Please like, rate, share on whatever platform that you use. And we'll see you next time. Good job, Joshy.
Bye, Clay.